Thank you very much for taking your seats. Thank you. Good morning again, Excellencies. Let me welcome you to this first Biennial Summit for a sustainable, inclusive and resilient global economy. Right now, this year, it's all about implementing the commitments that have been made in financing for the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. I am Masood Ahmed, President Emeritus of the Center for Global Development, and it is my honor to serve as the moderator for this first plenary session of today's summit. Today's gathering is convened by His Excellency the Secretary General, who is sitting two away from me, and I will be turning to him shortly to give us his views, his perspective, his instructions, what he would like to see coming out of this meeting today. But before I do that, let me just take a couple of minutes to say two things. First, on substance, I think there's no need for me to remind all the people in this room about the urgency of aligning the global finance with the Agenda of 2030. We've said it enough times that the majority of SDGs are off track, that financing gaps are growing, and debt distress is widespread. This Biennial Summit, the first one, offers a unique opportunity then to take stock of the financing commitments that have been made, including at the recent 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, but elevating this to the highest political level. The issue is not a technical issue. There are many ways in which we could make progress, and yet we are not making the progress that is needed. The question then becomes today, can we take this one step further and identify what at the political level can be done to advance the delivery of commitments that have been made and to try and narrow that gap. Second, I want to say a word on housekeeping. We have 90 minutes allocated to this session. You all have many meetings during the day, and we have a very full list of distinguished speakers. So the only way we are going to bridge that gap between so many things to say and so little time is if all the speakers remember that they have an allotted time of 4 minutes to make their 1 or 2 points. That would then go down. Second housekeeping point I want to make is that we are joined remotely today by a graphic facilitator, Ms. Marsha Dunn, who will be listening closely to our discussions. In real time, she will visualize the themes and insights that emerge from our session. You will see her visual synthesis at the end of this opening segment, and digital copies of her images will be made available after the summit. So with those housekeeping points out of the way, it's now my honor to invite His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to get us started.
Excellencies, colleagues and friends, this summit is focused on taking stock of commitment leaders have made on financing for development. But allow me to briefly step back and take stock of this gathering itself. The Biennial Summit is not just another meeting, it's the first of its kind. We have heads of international financial institutions, leaders of major multilateral platforms such as G7, G20, and the President of COP30. Heads of state representing major country groupings, including those that may not be the biggest economies in the world, but have the biggest stake in developing finance. This is networked, inclusive multilateralism in practice. We first proposed such an initiative 4 years ago, which was welcomed in the Pact for the Future. Why? Because we saw financing gaps widening and debt distress proliferating. International dialogue on finance spread across institutions, and multilateralism under strain, with developing countries often excluded from decision-making, even in matters of their direct concern. But we also heard the voices of people loud and clear, struggling to make ends meet, falling further behind, and wondering if leaders will act for them. This summit was envisioned as a space to help bring coherence, ambition, inclusivity and action to the global financing conversation. These efforts have advanced significantly in the last 4 years. We all agree that far more financing must be mobilized to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. We also understand that today's international financial architecture needs reform to respond to the world of today and the scale and complexity of its challenges. Excellencies, the summit is built on 3 key premises. First, cooperation, especially in light of collapsing aid commitments and rising trade tensions. Second, coherence, to build bridges across the many spaces where dialogues on development finance are taking place. Third, inclusivity. The distribution of economic power in the world is grossly unequal and should not be basis for determining participation. Developing countries must have a greater say and sway in the decisions that affect them. As we focus on financing for development commitments, we have much to build on. A growing consensus has emerged on what needs to be done, most recently in the Financing for Development Conference in Sevilla. A consensus on ways to unlock more finance by strengthening the capacity of domestic resource mobilization, tripling the lending power of multilateral development banks to make them bigger and bolder, and improving our approach to leveraging private finance. Further details must be agreed in Belém on climate finance. A consensus on actions to take on debt with new instruments to reduce borrowing costs and risks, including from climate shocks, and faster support for countries facing illiquidity and debt distress. And consensus on steps towards a fairer system by amplifying the voice and participation of debtor countries, piloting solidarity levies, and advancing inclusive international tax cooperation. Actions have been taken, but now we must go further. The summit provides a space to discuss how we move forward together. In this session, we will hear from 3 groups of leaders. From multilateral organizations, we look forward to hearing what more you can do to deliver on commitments. From multilateral platforms, to hear about what efforts you will champion. And from country groupings, to focus on what actions you must need and what the global community should prioritize. And so I say again, this is a very unique summit with a powerful display of political capital. But meetings are not the objective. They are the means to deliver for people who are looking for action now. Let us use this summit to strengthen our cooperation and take decisive steps towards a more resilient, inclusive and sustainable future. And I thank you.
And I thank the Secretary General. Thank you, Secretary General, for starting us off with a very clear agenda, but also a bit of what lies at the origin of this initiative, what's brought us to this point and what we need to go forward. Let me now turn to Ms. Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, to deliver her remarks. Madam Baerbock.
Thank you. $4 trillion, not billion, but trillion. That almost unfathomable sum is the current gap in financing the Sustainable Development Goals. Some may say the number is too high. We could never possibly close the gap. But this ignores the fact that we already spend such amounts, not on schools and hospitals, on medicine or clean energy, but on defense. Last year alone, we collectively spent almost 2.5 trillion. So it's not about money and amounts, it's about prioritization. Money matters. It matters to the 272 million children listed as out of school. It matters to the 600 million people in Africa who are waiting for electricity. It matters to hospitals and patients facing a shortage of 11 million healthcare workers. Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, President of ECOSOC, it's an honor to participate in this first Biennial Summit for a Sustainable, Inclusive and Resilient Global Economy. And as the Secretary General has underlined, it's the first of its kind. And sometimes we rush through these meetings and UN institutions, but I would like to take a moment acknowledging that some have fought for years that this could happen. Among them, especially the Secretary General, so I would like to thank him for bringing this important topic not only on the agenda, but fighting for it for a couple of years. Thank you, dear Mr. Secretary General. We know that it's so important because we all know the figures. And we know that all pieces of our multilateral system have to work in sync if we are delivering results, particularly on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. But this is also an opportunity to link it to other initiatives we are working on today, and an opportunity to ensure that the UN's own reforms, guided by the UN80 initiatives, ensures complementarity and cohesion with the international finance architecture. It's an opportunity to build on the Pact of the Future and the Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development. We know that the Pact for the Future adopted in September last year was designed to turbocharge the SDGs. It offers clear recommendations on international financial reform, including giving developing countries a greater say within international financial institutions, by mobilizing more financing from multilateral development banks and reviewing debt concerns that hinder our humble access to finance. In June, Member States took this further with the Compromiso de Sevilla, which recognized the gaps in financing as symptoms of systematic shortcomings. The outcome of Sevilla recommended concrete steps, including tripling the lending capacity of multilateral development banks by 2035, rechanneling special drawing rights, expanding and accelerating debt relief, and increasing the volume of predictability of concessional finance. Taken together, these steps, especially if synchronized within South-South cooperation, can empower countries with the tools and resources needed to meaningfully drive sustainable development. Excellencies, this has been a long road, and we made already in 2015 a promise, a plan of action for people, planet and prosperity that included leaving no one behind. But promises without action are simply not enough. 10 years later, we know we are failing on this promise. We see this in 700 million people who still live in extreme poverty, 673 million people who experienced hunger last year. And we see that especially in the saddled with debt. External debt services have reached nearly 500 billion in 2023. Those are resources that could otherwise have been spent building on infrastructure, hospitals, boosting social support and financing the important climate adaptation. Colleagues, these are not just numbers of budgets. These are numbers about people that are failing through the cracks of the financial architecture that is in dire need of reform. As the Secretary General once said, we can't build a future for our grandchildren with a system built for our grandparents. To put it a bit less diplomatically, the truth is, without a deep reform of financial institutions, and unless we solve the vicious debt trap, we will never deliver on the SDGs. Therefore, change is needed, but we also know change is not easy. It can be unnerving, but we need to have the right system, the right tools in place to get the jobs done, and we have some incredible actors here, as mentioned before, with strong ladies leading them, to reinvigorate the UN reform agenda, as well as the systematic changes across the international financial architecture, to be game changers if we are really backing our financial commitments. Now is the time to align our efforts, strengthen global cooperation, unlock resources, and deliver effectively and equally on the promises we made. Now is the time to act together to leave no one behind. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President of the General Assembly. Let me turn now to the President of ECOSOC, His Excellency Mr. Lok Bahadur Thapa.
Thank you. Distinguished heads of state and government, Secretary General, President of General Assembly, principals of multilateral institutions, excellencies, distinguished delegates. It is my honor as the President of Economic and Social Council to welcome you to this inaugural Biennial Summit for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient global economy. We meet at a time when the global economy faces mounting headwinds and the multilateral systems is under severe strain. Fragmentation is growing. Geopolitical tensions and shifting domestic agendas are reshaping the global landscape. Trade frictions are eroding trust in the multilateral trading systems. Official development assistance is stretched thin even as it needs grow sharper. And climate commitments remain far from fulfilled. The world's most vulnerable countries are paying the highest price with the least fiscal space to respond. Yet we have also seen that when the international community comes together, progress is possible. Just 3 months ago, member states adopted the Sevilla Commitment, a renewed global framework for financing for sustainable development. This outcome of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which I had the privilege of co-facilitating, sets out decisive steps to catalyze investment to close the 4 trillion SDG financing gap in developing countries, to address the data and sustainable development crisis, to reform the international financial architectures and empower every nation. Today's summit, mandated by the Pact of the Future, builds on that foundation. It is designed to strengthen systemic links between the United Nations and international financial institutions. And it calls for reforms that amplify the voice and representation of developing countries in global decision-making. Excellencies, ECOSOC is central to this effort. The Sevilla Commitment gave the Council new mandates to convene a special meeting on financial integrity, to launch a recurring dialogue on credit rating, and to strengthen the Financing for Development Forum through deeper biannual reviews of systemic issues. It also called on us to exchange on regulatory frameworks, digital financial services, and to better integrate private sector engagement into the FFD follow-up process. As the UN's central coordinating body for the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development, ECOSOC connects universal membership with international financial institutions, the G20, and other platforms. By promoting coherence across these arenas, we can turn commitments into action and action into impact. As ECOSOC and United Nations celebrate their 80th anniversaries. Our task is to restore trust in international cooperations. That means easing debt burdens, expanding fiscal space, and directing investment in sustainable development. It also means ensuring reforms are inclusive, equitable, and legitimate, and that diversity and gender representation in global governments is strengthened. Excellencies, as ECOSOC President, I'm committed to ensuring that the ambition set out in Sevilla and reaffirmed here today translates into real results for those who need them the most. Let us seize this moment to work together across institutions and across borders to build a fairer, more resilient, and more sustainable global economy. I thank you.
I thank the President of ECOSOC, who we now have had 3 introductory statements, and they give you a sense of where we're coming from, a sense of what's left to be done and the gaps that's there and the urgency and the imperative of filling those gaps, the impact they will have on people's lives, and also the clear agenda of items that has emerged now from various meetings, including the Sevilla meeting, which gives us a sense of things that need to be done. So now we move to the discussion in this meeting from all of you who have an opportunity to speak, to say, well, how are we going to actually take all of that and turn it into practical, implementable actions that will make a difference? As you said, it's not just a question of meeting for meeting's sake, Secretary General. It's how does this have an impact on people's lives? And as the Secretary General said, there are 3 groups of speakers for today. We have the principals representing multilateral institutions. We have heads of state and government who are currently presiding over multilateral platforms. And we have heads of state and government who represent different country groupings. The design of the next hour and a bit is to intersperse these speakers so that we get some interaction from their different perspective. With that, the first speaker that I would like to turn to, if I may, is Madam Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, to get her perspective on what the IMF can do. What is your message, Madam Georgieva, to take this agenda forward in the context in which we are? Kristalina.
Thank you very much. It is so good to listen to those who set the tone. And if I may, as one of the grandmothers in this audience, actually, we grandmothers, we feel very strong sense of urgency that there has to be change for the sake of our grandchildren. So what is happening in the world? Profound shifts. The global economic system is being reset in multiple ways. Geopolitics looms large over international economic relations. New technologies offer tremendous opportunities, but also risks, including the risks of countries falling further behind. And we are in the context of highly uneven population growth across the world. Reshaping global trade, reshaping investment is also creating exceptionally high uncertainty. And that is hanging like a heavy cloud over consumers and investors. We face this world hamstrung in 2 ways, and we heard some about it. First, after years of shock after shock, global public debt is going to reach about 100% of GDP by the end of this decade. And it denies many countries the fiscal space they need to absorb future shocks and to attend to the pressing needs of their populations. Second, to make matters worse, global growth is projected to be lackluster 3% over the next years, materially lower than the historic 3.7% of the decades before COVID. And yet, despite these realities, the global economy has proven to be remarkably resilient to these major shocks. And the question is, why this resilience? One, we owe it to the sustained efforts countries have made to set up sound policies, and very important, to build strong institutions. Two, we owe it to the adaptive power of private sector with its capacity to innovate and adjust to change. So in that context, what can countries do for their people? The short answer is get your house in best possible order. In this more fragmented world, you can least afford self-inflicted injuries. You have to be determined to set domestic priorities, and we at the IMF see top two. First, act decisively to put your debt on a sustainable path, flat or downward, and rebuild policy space. That means budget consolidation, hard to do. People get easily accustomed to public spending going up, and it is very hard to get it down. But down it must go. And also raise more revenues. There are still countries where tax to GDP is below 15%. Need not be this way. Second, structural reforms that are going to unleash the power of private sector investments. Where regulation is outdated, you don't need it, take it out. Where access to finance is constrained, make it easy. And think of property rights security, because then people have the confidence to invest. Now, doing all this need not be countries doing it alone. We need each other. And we have the institutions that are there to support you. At the IMF, we are determined to continue to play a very constructive role and support financially our members, especially lower-income countries. We have 50 programs. 50 of our members benefit from those programs. More than half are low-income and fragile states. And I'm proud to say that we have strengthened our capacity to lend to low-income countries by doubling the lending of the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust while restoring a self-sustained model. I also am very determined that we would continue to do more on the debt front. We have set together with the World Bank the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. It has produced, finally, a playbook for debt restructuring. Play by the book, things can get much better faster. And let me say, I'm totally on the page of institutions. The world is changing, institutions have to change. And we see this as our moral responsibility. Last year, we added a third chair on our board for Sub-Saharan Africa to increase the voice of Sub-Saharan Africa. And we know we have to do more. Together, Madam President, together we can do well for our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Managing Director. So the one key message that I took away from what you just said is that in the time in which we are in the global economy, the number one priority for all countries is to get their own house in order as best they can, but they don't need to do it alone. They have international institutions, and cooperation makes that much easier to do. Thank you for reminding us of that. Let me now turn to His Excellency Mr. Mahmoud Mali Yusuf, who is the chair of the African Union Commission. Your Excellency, I think it would be good to hear how the priorities of the African Union membership now in terms of advancing financing for the 2030 agenda across the continent. The floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, heads of state and governments, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Madam President of the General Assembly, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to address this first Biennial Summit for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient global economy, implementing commitments on financing the SDGs. This gathering comes at an official and critical moment. For too long, Africa's voice has had too little influence in shaping global economic governance. Today, this summit provides an inclusive platform where the priorities and needs of African countries can be heard and translated into global action. Excellencies, we must face the gravity of the challenge. Africa's financing needs are immense. Growth remains insufficient. Debt vulnerabilities are rising, and the cost of capital is disproportionately high. These challenges reinforce each other and risk locking African economies into a cycle of slow development, structural dependency, and missed opportunities. This is why the African Union welcomes the growing consensus on the urgent need to scale up development finance and to reform the international financial architecture. The Finance for Development Conference held earlier this year in Seville marked an important milestone. It brought forward a shared vision and actions that can drive change if followed by sustainable commitment and implementation. From the perspective of the African Union, several priorities are clear. First, strengthening African institutions, including deepening our capital markets and advancing the creation of an African credit rating agency to address persistent structural biases. Second, ensuring African perspectives are integrated in international tax cooperation, particularly in the fight against illicit financial flows, which drain nearly $88 billion annually from our continent and deprive it of resources that could transform health, education, and infrastructure. Third, addressing the issue of debt in a sustainable manner, not only through temporary relief, but also by creating mechanisms that guarantee long-term stability and resilience. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the urgency is undeniable. Reform of the global financial system is no longer optional. It is an imperative if we are to meet the promise of the 23rd Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union Agenda 2063. The African Union stands ready to work hand in hand with the United Nations and all partners represented here to transform consensus into action and action into results that will change the lives of our peoples for the better. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for laying out the priorities from the perspective of the membership of the African Union. Let me now turn to invite His Excellency Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa and this year's President of the G20. Mr. President, what priorities are you anticipating as South Africa to advance through the G20 process to mobilize resources and deliver on the commitments that have been made to finance sustainable development? Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellencies and honored delegates and leaders who are present here, it's an honor to address this Biennial Summit, and in fact it is quite a historic moment, this. I think many of us will agree that we gather at a time when the Agenda 2030 is in peril. We gather at a moment when we need to address a number of challenges, and it is estimated that we need, from a financing point of view, to finance development, to close a financing gap of some $4 trillion annually if we are to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, a succession of crises have exposed the fragility of our interconnected economies and also revealed deep inequities in our capacity and our ability to respond to these. While some nations are able to mobilize trillions to shield their citizens, but also to mobilize trillions to wage war and also to address pandemics, others are left constrained by debt and denied the access to global capital. We should use this summit, I believe, to push for the full implementation of the commitments made across various forums, from the Financing for Development process to the G20 and to the climate change COP meetings. We must strengthen coordination between the UN and the African Union, the G20, as well as international financial institutions and other global financial actors, and to do so by embedding inclusivity at the heart of the global economic governance. To close the SDG financing gap, we need to undertake what I believe are the following bold measures. Firstly, we need debt relief and restructuring that is faster, but that is also fairer and more comprehensive. And secondly, we need to mobilize affordable, accessible financing from a wide range of sources, from development funding institutions, from private capital entities, and so on. Thirdly, we need to rechannel unused special drawing rights to countries that need them. Fourthly, we must scale up concessional finance through the development banks. Lastly, we must reform global tax rules to curb illicit financial flows that continue to proliferate in various countries. Beyond financial instruments, we need confidence that commitments that are made will be honored and that global rules will be shaped by all members and not just a few. It is often quite disheartening when we hear commitments being made and announced at big conferences, and when it finally gets to the practicality of it, particularly for countries that are in need, we find shortcomings and we find reversals. Let us forge a new compact for financing sustainable development that is rooted in solidarity, in equity, and mutual accountability. South Africa stands ready to ensure that this summit does become a turning point in our collective effort to build a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient global economy. And we're looking forward that the G20 participants, when they come to South Africa in November, that the issues of financing for development and the support that needs to be given for countries that are in need of lightening their debt burdens will be addressed proactively, practically, and that the commitments that we make are commitments that we will stand by and execute. If we can do that, the challenges that many countries are facing now will be ameliorated, and we will be able to reposition the global economy in a much better way. If we do that as well, we'll be able to say, yes, we are living to the adage of leaving no one behind and leaving no country behind. Thank you.
Thank you, President Ramaphosa. I want to just signal one point that you raised, which is that commitments made at conferences need to be accompanied by the associated action during implementation. And I thank you for raising the issue that commitments are sometimes not followed through when you actually get down to the practical implementation of the consequences of those commitments. Let me now, if I may, invite His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Yunus, Chief Advisor of the People's Republic of Bangladesh and Vice Chair of the Least Developed Countries. Dr. Yunus, could you share perhaps what you think the least developed countries most need right now, and what in this range of things that could be done should the international community be prioritizing in terms of the actions that will have the greatest benefit for that set of countries?